What is going on, Bengals fans? Chris Daughtry here with another edition of Bengals Breakdown. Cincinnati got a bunch of good news today. Joe Flacco was announced as the starter. Also got some good news on Shemar Stewart and Lucas Patrick as well. First, let's jump into this Joe Flacco news. The Bengals now are planning on starting Joe Flacco against the Green Bay Packers this week. This all coming per Zach Taylor during his press conference today with the Cincinnati media. He also said that, he jumped on the phone with Joe Flacco, and he said that that was probably the second thing that he told him immediately. The Bengals ended up sending a car up to drive Joe Flacco and his wife down to Cincinnati. So, immediately, Zach Taylor knew that Joe Flacco was going to be the starter for Cincinnati this week against the Green Bay Packers. So if you guys are excited that the Bengals are benching Jake Browning, get down there and like today's video. I would assume this should crush a bunch of records here for individual likes on individual videos here. So if you guys are excited that Joe Flacco is going to be the starter instead of Jake Browning, get down there and like today's video. All right, so far this season, Joe Flacco hasn't been great for the Browns. But 2 years ago, when he was with the Browns, led them to the playoffs, it was just electric city for them. And one thing that's interesting as well, I think the stats a little bit right now are kind of skewed against Joe Flacco because the Browns receiving core has been pretty bad so far this year. They have 11 drops. Compare that to the Bengals wide receivers this year. They only have one drop. And there was a couple of times you remember back when the Bengals ended up playing the Browns in week one. There was one where Jerry Jeudy caught the ball, fell down on the ground, and, the ball pops up in the air, and the Bengals end up picking it off. There have been a couple of interceptions there that were, just tipped balls from those wide receivers for the Browns. So, it hasn't been great so far this year for Joe Flacco, but, his wide receiver core definitely has not helped him out either. And one thing very interesting as well, Joe Flacco already led the Browns this year, 2 weeks ago, by the way, to a win over Green Bay. I was doing some digging, and the last time that a player beat the same team in the same year with different teams, he was starting on two different teams, was like 1966 or something like that. It's going to this would be the first time in the Super Bowl era that a starting quarterback is going to be playing the same team or against the same team with two different teams. And if he can end up winning that, it would just be an electric factory here in Cincinnati. He wasn't great necessarily versus Green Bay, but they did come away with a win. So hopefully we can do the same thing this week against the Packers. Jake Browning so far this year, he just has not been good enough to be the Bengals starter with Joe Burrow out. You see the touchdowns and interceptions right there. It had 3 touchdowns at the end of that game last week in the fourth quarter, so that definitely helped out his numbers a little bit there. But you see the completed air yards per attempt there, only 3.2. He just, every single time the Bengals try to push the ball downfield, just ends up getting picked off or, incomplete or something like that. So, at the end of the day, it's a different player out there. We'll see if Joe Flacco can help this Bengals team out because they desperately need the help at this quarterback spot. So I want to hear from you guys down at the pinned comment of today's video. Is Joe Flacco an upgrade over Jake Browning? Let me know your honest opinion down inside the comment section at the pinned comment. Type Y for yes or N for no. All right, a couple pros and cons to get to here just really quickly before we get into some more injury news here for the Bengals. Some pros, first off, for Joe Flacco. He does have a stronger arm than Jake Browning. He can push the ball downfield, get the ball to those playmakers, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. Those guys, if you go back and look at the games, those guys are getting open, but Jake Browning just isn't able to get him the ball. Also, another pro, Joe Flacco is a veteran. He has been in the league for a very, very long time. He has seen everything. Whether that comes down to, just making checks at the line of scrimmage or, just getting the ball to his playmakers at the end of the day, whether it's dumping it off or, changing the play to a run play or something like that, or even, making the right call at the line of scrimmage to be able to, shift the protection at the line of scrimmage, because we know right now that is a, weak point on this Cincinnati offense is their offensive line. So, if he's just doing all the smart things, those are pros. I think is going to be an upgrade over Jake Browning. There are some cons to Joe Flacco, though. He is 40 years old. We go from, he's a veteran to he's 40 years old. So kind of a, good and bad thing there at the exact same time. So, again, I said he's not very mobile. Billy was like, I don't think he's very mobile at all. So, good point there from producer Billy. But, when you're back behind this Bengals offensive line, if they cannot consistently block for Joe Flacco, that could end up being a, negative thing at the end of the day, because, we saw what happened with Joe Burrow. We saw what happened with Jake Browning when he was out there just constantly under pressure. Could still be the same thing for this Bengals offense. But, I do think there's some positives and negatives to go with Joe Flacco starting this week for the Cincinnati Bengals. All right, we'll get to some very good injury news here in just a second, but today's show is presented by PrizePicks. You and I make decisions every single day, but on PrizePicks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this football season on PrizePicks, where it's good to be right. PrizePicks is now the only app that offers stacks, which means you can pick the same player up to 3 times in the same lineup. If you want to pick more than on Josh Allen's pass yards, rush yards, and touchdowns, now you can pick all of them in the same lineup only on PrizePicks. This is what we got cooked up for the power play for this week's slate of games. Green Bay versus Cincinnati, going with Ja'Marr Chase, more than receiving yards at 63.5. Josh Jacobs, he's pretty much good for a touchdown in every single game. So going with more than on just a half touchdown for him. That could be rushing or receiving. And then Tucker Kraft as well, going with a more than on receiving yards for him. PrizePicks is super simple to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player stats, and if you get your picks right, you could cash in. Play PrizePicks to get action on football in more than 40 different states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. So download the PrizePicks app today and use promo code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That link and promo code will be down in the description of today's show. It'll also be down at the pinned comment of today's show as well. PrizePicks, it's good to be right. The Bengals also got some very positive injury news today. Zach Taylor saying that defensive end Shemar Stewart will return to practice today. It is going to be limited, but a lot of the times when a player is limited on Wednesday, it means they're going to be good to go by game day. So we'll continue to monitor that. We'll put out shorts and everything like that as the week goes on, and we continue to get those practice updates, those injury updates as well. I think Joseph Ossai, Myles Murphy have done an okay job. We've seen flashes from both of those guys. Trey Hendrickson has still been Trey Hendrickson. He's gotten, 4 sacks so far this year. But, with Shemar Stewart, you picked him in the first round of this past year's NFL draft. He was only able to end up playing in 2 games. He didn't start the first game. Second game, he did start, and he was working his way into more snaps and just creating more pressure for this Bengals defensive line. So hopefully they can get him back for this game against Green Bay this weekend. And, at the end of the day, just having him out there, I think that would help this Bengals defense just overall. So let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Will Shemar Stewart return to play versus the Green Bay Packers? Get your predictions down inside the comment section. Type 1 if you think that's going to be a yes, or type 0 if you think it's going to be a no. Will Shemar Stewart return to play against the Green Bay Packers this weekend? All right, some more good injury news here. The Bengals, we put a short out this morning on this as well. The Bengals cleared offensive guard Lucas Patrick to return to practice, opening up that 21-day window. Now, he can return at any point during that 21-day window, but I think it's important to note as well, if he doesn't, whether that's he re-aggravates that injury or he's just not able to go by the time that 21 days, comes up. If he is not able to return, then he would then go back on injured reserve for the remainder of the season. Now, he does not have to move to the 53-man roster until he returns so he can practice with the team, and he doesn't have to take up that final roster spot. So as of right now, a corresponding roster move won't actually have to happen until they add him and clear him to, end up playing. And, it would be much, much needed right now along this Bengals offensive line. You started off with Lucas Patrick there, then you went to Dalton Risner, and then you go to Jalen Rivers. And, I even saw somebody earlier, they commented on the short saying, move Dalton Risner over to that left guard spot, bench, Dylan Fairchild. I guess that's another option that the Bengals could end up doing if they put Lucas Patrick back in there, here, whether it's this week or whether it's next week, whatever it ends up being, to that right guard spot. But, that's, up for debate if you want to debate that. I'm not necessarily saying. I just, saw somebody comment that down on that short that we put out earlier today. But back to Dalton Risner and Jalen Rivers here. Both of these guys have played pretty much now the same amount of snaps. Both of them have been pretty mediocre at that right guard spot. And, Lucas Patrick only played 16 snaps before going out with that injury. Pretty much, he played a drive and a half so far this season. But that one drive was the only time that the Bengals were actually able to run the ball with any kind of success. And I think just having him out there, we got a very small sample size, but having him out there was the only time the Bengals have been able to actually run the ball so far this season. So I do think having him out there would help Chase Brown out a lot, being able to run the football. This is one thing that I found very, very interesting when kind of looking up some of these Chase Brown stats here. On the first drive of the season, Chase Brown had 33 rushing yards on the first drive of the season. In the next 4 games, he had 127 rushing yards combined. That's only 32, really it was like 31.9 yards per game. So he had more rushing yards on that first drive of the season than he has had, on average, on a per game average since that first drive. So just getting Lucas Patrick back might not necessarily fix all the problems you have right now along the offensive line because, like I said, it was still just a very, very small sample size that we had there from Lucas Patrick. But I do think it could very, very well help out this Bengals run game.